Don't worry, I only have 350 pages of remarks. We'll be out of here by midnight. I'm kidding. Just about any way you look at it, any way you study it, you've got massively biased campuses. You've got surveys of faculty showing it's, choose it, Democrat over Republican, left over right, anywhere from 3-to-1 to 9-to-1. English departments, 100 to nothing in large schools. Why should that matter? Well, you can read the MLA style book back there on the Modern Language Association convention and see how they're politicizing those courses. But that's just it. I mean, and student journalists have dug up the registration cards on their professors and found the same ratios. We looked at cabinets of every president from Carter through Obama. And we looked at what proportion of the cabinet went on to academia. For Carter and Clinton, it's 50%. For Republican administrations, it's 3 to 6 people. In fact, even if you are not an identifiable Republican and below cabinet level, it's not much easier. I got to share one quote with you. It's a long one, bear with me, but I think it's worth it. Diane Ravitch worked in the administration of George Bush 41. Happy birthday. And she said, when he retired and she wanted to go back to academia, she said, she worked in the Department of Education for him. She said, there is a price to be paid for being politically independent and being outside the mainstream consensus. I paid the price 10 years ago after I had served as assistant secretary in the first Bush administration. Although I went into the administration as a Democrat and came out as an independent, I didn't realize how much I had shocked my colleagues by working, she meant her academic ones, in a Republican administration. Bear in mind, she never registered with the GOP. After spending an additional year in Washington as a fellow at the Brookings Institution, I decided it was time to return to New York City. When I called the president of Teachers College, with whom I had co-taught a course for several years, and where I had been an adjunct faculty member for 20 years, I said I wanted to return to Teachers College. I said that I wanted to resume my position, and he hemmed and hawed, and he finally said, "Your colleagues do not want you back. They do not like your views." That shouldn't matter. Look at the military. Until recently, they voted Republican by about the same lopsided margins that academia voted Democratic. Did it make a difference in training? When you're going through Paris Island, your drill instructor is not going to ask what your position is on the Second Amendment. Arguably, that might have some impact on the job. But make the mistake of revealing that you like it in a college job interview, and what are your chances? Now, we cover, 300 professors a year. Most of them, yeah, pretty unfavorably. Although really, we're just quoting what they're saying. One time we came back with the newsletter, all the quotation marks were missing. I realized the one punctuation mark we couldn't do without was a quotation mark, because we try to report on what they're saying and what they're doing as fully and completely as we can. And we try to give the most complete information that we can. www.academia.org. Type in any professor, any college, any course, see what happens. But we have a solution I proposed this afternoon, not a complete solution. One of the things I do, been here since I was an intern like you guys, actually, since 1983. And it's not unusual for me to like ask the same question of 20 different people. You know, like what's actually in the Social Security Trust Fund? How many people actually get the Medicare prescription drug benefit? Did China ever pay back its loans to us? Yeah. Don't have answers to any of those questions, by the way, except the Social Security Trust Fund. Okay. One question I have asked is, two variations of it. Is academia liable under truth in advertising laws? Or why isn't academia liable under truth in advertising laws? And I usually get really blank looks, like from the former Secretary of Education, Margaret Spellings. A suggestion, a simple one. Since they all brag about their accreditation and advertise it, which is really interesting because they're usually accredited by people who formerly worked at the same universities as administrators. How on the up and up is that? Well, my suggestion is when a school, when a group covering the school gets a given number of complaints, we should urge that school to put an asterisk next to the accreditation they usually trumpet. Private companies do this all the time. How many asterisks have you seen in ads? We may not follow them, but it helps to have them there. It gives us information we wouldn't normally have. And there's a lot of information that schools are not giving us. I don't really have an enforcement mechanism for this, but I think with reporting, with actually putting the schools on notice, that we could bring this about. And I think it'd be worth doing. All we are saying is give the asterisk a chance. Now, John, you can talk about what a dumb idea you think it is.
I want to start off by confessing to you that college campuses are biased. And in fact, I'm biased. And I suspect all of you are biased if you're living, thinking, breathing human beings. We're all biased. And to me, there's nothing worse than trying to listen to somebody who claims to be unbiased, because they really are biased. Mostly they're probably going to be biased at boring you to death. But everyone is biased. And we should also recognize the fact that in a free society, individual biases are not randomly distributed among professions in perfect proportion to the general population. Various different kinds of professions have people believe different things. And if you look at corporate CEOs or soldiers or artists or professors or teachers, you're going to find to one degree or another there is a general bias among all those different professions. And one reason for that bias is some people like to go out and make a living. Mal happened to mention how after serving in the cabinet of Democratic administrations, lots of people turned to academia. And I suspect that's the reason why that happens for Democrats more than Republicans is because only Democrats are dumb enough to go work in academia when they could get a higher paying job somewhere else in the corporate world. And that's certainly true of a lot of professors as well. You would have to be, from a rational economic Chicago school perspective, quite stupid to want to actually go into academia if you were concerned about making money. You would spend years getting a PhD, you have a very low chance of actually getting a tenure track job that might pay you $40,000 or $50,000. Why do people want to go into academia under those circumstances? And certainly, if you want to make money, and it appears conservatives are better at making money than liberals, you don't go into academia. So there are reasons and there are explanations for this bias. And it is important to note that there are many kinds of different biases on college campuses, not all of them liberal. You can take a look at ROTC, which I believe will, most of the people in this room will acknowledge has a pro-military bias. I think we can all agree to that. You can look at business schools, which have a generally pro-corporate bias. You can look at lots of religious schools that have kind of bias that is imposed on people. And that to me is the key issue here. I don't want to argue against the existence of bias. I think we need more bias. We need to embrace individual bias and protect the freedom of people to express it. What we need to worry about is freedom. And that to me is the key issue that we should be debating, is where is there bias, not where there's bias, but where there is freedom. I can give you kind of a personal example of what's the difference between having a bias and the kind of repression that I want to talk about. I wrote about this in my book, Patriotic Correctness, about a personal experience I had several years ago in 2003 at Illinois State University. I had started up an alternative liberal newspaper that included writings by people who were fairly critical, I think you could say, of George W. Bush. And one time I was distributing some copies of the paper at the student union, and a student came up to me and asked to see the copies of paper that I had, and I said, I thought, great, a fan, and I gave it to him, and he took them and he threw them in the trash. And I asked him about this, and he said that this crap, as he called it, was something that he and his friends threw away whenever he saw it on campus. And he said that I had a right to print the newspaper, and he had a right to throw it away. Now, both me and Brad, he was very proud to spell out his name to me. He was very proud of his acts of throwing out my newspaper. Brad said that Brad had a bias and I had a bias. And the difference between us, though, was not that we had biases. The difference was that I was exercising my freedom by printing a newspaper, and he was trying to restrict it by throwing it away and restrict the rights of other people to read it. And that, to me, is the key recognition that we have to do. We have to understand everybody has bias, but we have to protect everyone's freedom, including the freedom to express those biases. And I should also note, by the way, that many conservative newspapers are thrown out on college campuses by misguided left-wingers who are exactly like Brad, except they have the opposite bias. And the way we approach the question of bias, I think, is key to this. And how do we deal with creating free universities and defending them? And part of that is defending the rights of individual people to express that bias. And I can recount for you a lot of specific examples where there has been this kind of repression of bias, of repression of freedom, in the name of enforcing a kind of bias. So one of the most important examples to me is what goes on at many Catholic colleges. You can look at the most frequently banned play in America, which is the Vagina Monologues. And it's a play that's been banned numerous times at many different Catholic colleges. There have been cases of just recently of 2 commencement speakers who were disinvited from Catholic colleges. Anna Maria College banned Victoria Kennedy from speaking. In Ohio, college disinvited a state representative, both because they were Democrats who supported abortion rights. And so all of these kinds of biases that are out there, to me, it's important to protect that bias and to protect that freedom. And what it says to me is, and it's not just an issue of Catholic colleges restricting freedom of people. There was a case I spoke about very loudly, objecting to a couple years ago, where Wheaton College in Illinois, a small fundamentalist college, fired a professor because he became a Catholic. And this was particularly appalling to me, not just because of the repression of this kind of religious freedom that they ought to have, but that the college did not actually have any rules against being a Catholic. Instead, what they determined was that this professor should be fired because he was no longer following the Bible, using the logic that Catholics don't obey the Bible, they obey the Pope. And this kind of anti-Catholic smear has a long history in discrimination in academia. But I think it's precisely the reason why we need to protect freedom on college campuses and speak out against these kind of acts of repression. I think it's entirely proper for a Catholic college or religious institution to have a bias, to express a bias. A Catholic college can speak out against, the administration can speak out against a play they don't like. They can speak out and express a bias against a speaker who has views they find objectionable without banning or repressing the freedom of people to hear that speaker. And that kind of logic, I think, is precisely what we need to have in academia. I personally would love to see more conservatives in academia. I welcome all of you to join academia if you don't mind the difficulties of getting a job. There are lots of wonderful things about academia aside from that. And I think that, however, a lot of the reasons what you need to do to bring more conservatives in academia, it's something that has to be done in the atmosphere of freedom. You can't, in the name of bias, impose your own bias on universities and say, for example, that force them, as some people have urged, to hire more conservatives. This is something Peter Wood of the National Association of Scholars and David Horowitz have argued, which is that universities should start giving hiring preferences to conservatives in academia. And I think that's precisely the opposite. That's imposing a bias. That's saying you're not going to hire people of a certain left-wing perspective simply because you're trying to address what you think is a problem in the free marketplace of ideas. And ultimately, that's what this is all about, that the free market creates this atmosphere. It creates the atmosphere where people take these jobs. And these are largely, and certainly should be, based on academic qualifications. What that means is that we need to find ways to bring more conservatives into academia. We need to protect tenure more so that conservatives feel free to speak out. We need to make the profession better paid by increasing funding for higher education, so more conservatives will want to get academic jobs that actually pay well. We need to end the system of adjuncts and respect all faculty as having a tenure-track position. So all of these things that the right has actually fought against are the way to bring more conservatives into academia and to encourage them. Ultimately, what we don't need, I think, are kind of things like an asterisk for accreditation, simply because it doesn't provide a kind of substantive evaluation of what goes on colleges. And there's a certain assumption that Mao makes, is that there's some sort of discrimination going on against conservatives simply because there's a smaller number of them. Well, that's not necessarily true. That's a fact that has to be proven. I don't think anyone in this room would accept the fact that academia discriminates against African Americans and women, even though their numbers are lower than in the general population. The mere fact that there is a bias, that there is some discrepancy in numbers between the regular populace and the people in a profession does not automatically mean that there's discrimination. And I think that's precisely the point about academia. I can cite for you example after example of left-wingers who have faced repression, who have been fired, who have suffered the consequences for speaking out. Just a few weeks ago, a woman was fired by the University of Texas at San Antonio after she had criticized the university for having crosses on campus. And the very day that an article appeared in the local newspaper about her criticism of the university and her efforts to stop crosses on campus, she received an email from the head of her department telling her that she would no longer be teaching classes in the fall as she had been scheduled to teach. So you see in all of this a constant reminder that what we need to do is protect freedom for everyone on campus. We need to protect the rights of individuals to express their biases. We need to have campuses devoted to liberty. And when we try to deal with the issue of bias against conservatives in academia, we need to do it in a way that respects the freedom of everyone, that enhances the freedom of everyone. We need to have a system that encourages people to join academia, that speaks out against individual cases of bias and discrimination, but one that ultimately protects academic freedom. And so with that, I'll leave it to Mao to respond.
First off, I do want to mention that John has a unique fact in his resume. He was actually a liberal student who distributed our campus report newspaper. You might be the only one in that group, John. Now, just a few things. One is, you cannot compare bias in academia to other groups, even leaving aside the military. You can't even compare it to the media or to the arts, because, and accuracy in media tracks this 6 ways from Sunday, but at least there's somewhere else you can go and you can turn off the channel. The problem is, and you could do it in about a minute and a half. You can do that with the arts as well. In fact, I practice what I preach. I just avoid prime time altogether. Turner Classic Movies. Anyway, but once you're at a campus, it's very hard to transfer out. It's going to take much more than a minute, a day, a week, a semester sometimes. You are effectively at their mercy for an extended period of time. Also, to say that there is no bias towards the hiring of conservatives, there's just case after case. First off, if they get hired, it's as adjuncts or associates, and they're frequently denied tenure. Guillermo Gonzalez, or jobs, Mark Moyer, just two names that come to mind. UCLA just fired a professor who was a global warming skeptic. These cases are coming up all the time. And also, something I hear, a little code word they use. I've heard this from conservative professors who say, one code word they use is, we're worried about your collegiality. It's like they're starting to say conservative and have to think of another word that begins with a hard C. Okay. Also, if you think conservatives are better at making money, you really need to get to know more of us. That's not always the case. I also want to point out, I don't think we've ever come out for taking books off the shelf. We've sliced and diced Howard Zinn. I think everybody in the office has taken a whack at that one. Richard Hofstadter, the most widely used textbooks. I don't recall us ever coming out for taking them out of a class. I had a lady call and say, I'm alarmed, my daughter's learning this, what can I do? How can I get rid of this? I said, no, don't do that. Add books. We try to add books, and sometimes we publish our own. We did publish our own economics textbook, by the way. Voodoo Anyone, How to Understand Economics Without Really Trying. Very user-friendly guide. But try doing that. Also, business schools having a corporate bias. Well, you find that the breakdown of professors in business schools is about what it is in the rest of the university, maybe not as overwhelmingly left of center as the English department or women's studies, but still pretty much tilting to the left and moving more so as time goes by. There's more courses now in diversity that, than there is in actually profit and loss accounting. More that we're finding. Also, the vagina monologues banned on Catholic campuses. only the ones that don't get government funding. I've been on Georgetown when they're advertising this. And the way they're advertising it is almost more as graphic as the play. Also, we never recommended hiring quotas for conservatives. But a funny thing is, Harvard actually has an affirmative action program for fellowships for conservatives, a very small one. I think they take one a semester at the Kennedy School of Government. So I'm amazed that there are crosses at the University of Texas at San Antonio, especially when you can't find them on Catholic campuses anymore. I would like to know more about that story. That's all I have for now.
And your attacks, please. First, on the issue of whether there's discrimination in the hiring of conservatives, I can point to you a number of cases where left-wingers got fired and had their academic freedom infringed. Norman Finkelstein. I write about a lot of them in my book, both conservatives and liberals. The fact is that people who are controversial on college campuses are more likely to suffer consequences. They are more likely to be targeted and be fired and dismissed. And that is something that I think we need to defend. We need to defend controversial people of both the left and the right. Even if we think they're an idiot, like Ward Churchill, we have to defend their freedom. And what we need to do in those cases is say that it doesn't matter what your political viewpoint is. It doesn't matter if you're controversial. We want controversy on campuses. And you brought up the message, the word collegiality, and I am one of the fiercest opponents, along with the AAUP, the American Association of University Professors, of collegiality. It is considered absolutely unacceptable under the AAUP guidelines, and in my opinion, to consider in any way collegiality when in dealing with tenure and hiring practices. You consider the academic merit of a person, and that shouldn't include political criteria. It should include collegiality or how nice you are to everyone else. But again, what we need to do is defend the right to be biased in order to defend the right of individuals to speak out. And as for, you mentioned the vagina monologues, and really government funding has absolutely nothing to do with that. A lot of it depends on how willing a Catholic college is to stand up against very powerful forces of donors and alumni and the Catholic hierarchy against people who are devoutly arguing for repression. The Cardinal Newman Society is unquestionably an organization that's very influential on Catholic colleges and wants to engage in suppression and wants to see professors fired and speakers banned from campus and the vagina monologue banned from campus. You can go to their website. I encourage you to do it, and you will read the explicit demands for repression that they're making. And what I think that the mistake that is again, mistaking bias and repression, bias and freedom, and making the mistake of thinking that what makes a university more Catholic or more religious is its willingness to suppress opposing ideas. And I don't think that's true at all. I think what makes a university truly religious or truly Catholic in whatever way is its willingness to defend its ideas and to allow dissenting voices on campus. And I think that's also true for what you might consider liberal, politically correct universities, that they need to be held to account when they engage in censorship, when you will find people on there who are willing to do the same thing. I can give you and conclude with a little analogy of when bias is on the other foot. The bias shoe is on the other foot. I wrote in my most recent book about Rush Limbaugh about the fairness doctrine, and which I'm extremely critical of, and I think it is a terrible idea on every possible ground, free speech, pragmatic, whatever. And this is a cause that many leftists have taken up. They look at the bias in talk radio, which is even more overwhelming than any bias in academia, And they see this conservative bias in talk radio and say, why can't we have the fairness doctrine and impose some fairness on people? And ironically, when the fairness doctrine was overturned in 1987, Jesse Helms and Newt Gingrich voted to reinstate it because they thought the liberal media were biased and the fairness doctrine would ensure fairness. And on this point, Ronald Reagan was absolutely right, that you shouldn't have the government or other forces trying to impose fairness, trying to impose an unbiased perspective. You have to let the free marketplace of ideas work out, and you have to allow biases to exist, and you have to have a free society in which you rationally engage with these kind of arguments instead of trying to suppress the arguments you don't like.